And action!
The Saw franchise is undeniably interesting. It's like the Fast and the Furious of horror movies, with each film after the other becoming more and more ridiculous in design, and for what it's worth, I actually can't help but love it. But as a filmmaker wanting to learn more about the series and its origins, how did this gigantic franchise go from where it started? As someone who not only loves the first movie, I'm equally obsessed with understanding how did two filmmakers from a relatively small movie production country like Australia actually kickstart a horror genre movie revolution.
He goes, I think it will really stand out. It's, what do you think about this? A guy who wakes up to find this trap contraption on his face, that acts like a reverse bear trap. And I was like, that's kind of cool, I guess. That could really work, If we do it right, it could be pretty scary.
Today I want to go into the history behind this franchise as I find out what little moments became key breakthroughs in the production of the first movie, so that as a filmmaker I can find out how do they actually make it happen and what lessons I could apply for my own projects. This is a filmmaker's guide to Saw. The idea. With any sort of project, there has to be a conception of an idea. But sometimes before the idea comes the impetus for why it was made, the ignition for why it became an idea in the first place. And to understand that when it comes to Saw, we have to go back in time to the early 2000s where two young filmmakers first met at film school in Australia. After graduating, James Wan and Leigh Whannell were essentially a couple of broke film graduates. Leigh was the writer, and given their financial situation, he decided to come up with an idea that they could actually afford.
We wanted to make a film at a certain budget level before we had the story for the film. Both James and I found that restricting the film down to, okay, it's got to be two actors in one room, helped us come up with an idea, and that's essentially where Saw came from.
It was going to be a scenario involving a locked room situation, two characters trapped somewhere with nowhere to go. But to be fair, that's still kind of boring and also not that original. It made sense financially, but story-wise, how do you make that even interesting? To me, the real genius of this was the foundation for the idea that came paired with the element of mystery and horror.
I rang him one day and I go, hey Lee, I've got the idea for this film that we're gonna make. It's about two guys, they're stuck in this room. They're chained to both ends of this dungy, decrepit old bathroom. Lying in between them is a dead body. In one of the dead body's hand is a tape recorder. In the other hand is a gun, and each of these characters find these little mini tapes in their possession which they play, and there's a voice on the tape recorder that tells them what's going to happen to them if they don't play this game.
And to do that, Leigh needed a third character, someone that in my eyes was the entire catalyst and masterstroke for why this film became a franchise, and that was with Jigsaw. The story goes that while working at a job he was unhappy with, Leigh began having migraines, so much so that he was actually convinced that it had to be a brain tumor. And after going to see a neurologist to have an MRI, he was sitting in the waiting room and thought to himself, what if you were given the news that you had a tumor and that you were going to die soon? How would you react to that?
And so Jigsaw really was birthed from that. It's like, who put them in this room? Well, it's obviously a bad guy. Why did he do it? And I started thinking about what the theme of the film could be. If tomorrow a doctor was to tell you that your life was going to end in 3 weeks because you're suffering some disease, everything would change. You would look at things differently. But I was thinking it would be interesting if somebody got told by a doctor that they had a year to live and they snapped.
Thank God for those migraines, because that moment became the inspiration for Leigh to picture this third character of Jigsaw as someone who was told he had only 1 or 2 years to live. But moreover, writing him as someone who became bitter and resentful of others who had chosen to squander their own lives with immoral actions of their own, and who most likely didn't truly appreciate how lucky they were to be alive and healthy. This to me felt like the catalyst to then write in all of these great traps to test Jigsaw's victims and their own will to live by putting them through deadly games where they must endure great physical pain upon themselves in order to survive them. And I mean, these traps were just genius. But I cannot understate this moment alone, because through this one act of going to see the neurologist, Leigh had created a horror movie villain that would take his locked room idea and blow it up with such ingenuity and creativity that would propel this franchise into what it was today. In other words, this is the sole reason behind why Saw is so popular for what it is, which is all about the traps. It's what's so iconic about the series and why people go to see it. If you didn't have this third character, none of this happens at all.
I thought it would be interesting to have this person use their death sentence, this cancer thing, as a way of teaching other people to open their eyes.
Funding. But having an idea is just one thing, and writing a script for it is just the next logical step. Acquiring funding is a whole other ballgame, and to me, this is an element where I'm almost always so interested in because it's the one in my eyes that's the biggest gatekeeper to getting any movie or project made. Supposedly, the story goes, both James and Lee had initially $30,000 to go, but once they developed the script and finalized it, it was obvious they needed more. Attempting first to get their movie made in Australia, their producer couldn't really help them, and it seemed like no one in Sydney, which is somewhat the movie capital of Australia, was willing to help them either. It wasn't until their literary agent suggested that they go to the mecca of movies in LA. But interestingly, James and Lee initially refused due to the lack of traveling funds. It was only until the pair's agent convinced them to go on a plane that they actually did so.
So on the plane on the way over there, we were thinking it was a waste of money. We were like, it's such a 1 week in LA, and then on the plane on the way home, it was like, USA.
But before this, I think they actually did something equally smart apart from backing themselves in and getting out of Australia by choosing to make a proof of concept short film that showcased one of the script's most infamous moment in the reverse bear trap scene. While still working at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, supposedly James and Lee knew a cameraman who would help them with this film, shot on a 16mm camera over just 2 days and having the footage being transferred to DVDs ready to ship alongside the script. To me, this is just an example of the power of clever marketing mixed in with clever collaborations and just knowing who's around you that could help. But I think above all, this quote from James brings it home. He says, "Lee and I just loved the project so much and we wanted a career in filmmaking, so we just stuck to our guns." In the early months of 2003, a friend of a producer, Greg Hoffman, pulled him into his office and showed him that short film. Hoffman went on to add that 2 or 3 minutes into it, his jaw just hit the floor. Showing that same short and script to his partners, they later went on to form Twisted Pictures, which became the production company for the rest of the franchise. But what's also just as interesting is how much the producers believed in this project alongside James and Lee, as they not only gave them creative control, which was something that other studios didn't and were afraid to do so, but they also put up a second mortgage on their headquarters to do so. This gave Saw the kickstart funding of $1 to $1.2 million, which even adjusted for inflation is still only around $2 million in today's worth.
And everybody's doing this movie because they want to be in business with James Wan. Nobody's getting paid, so.
Execution. The third and final factor where any film needs to succeed on is with execution, because while a great idea can get your foot in the door, it's nothing if you cannot deliver, and to me, it again felt like having such a great premise also attracted some of the best talent and a little bit of luck in finding the right cast. Starting with Tobin Bell, single-handedly was he, in my opinion, the best decision for the casting choice of Jigsaw, and it's just crazy to think that before this, Tobin Bell was more or less a nobody in Hollywood. I mean, I really didn't know him before this movie, and I only noticed him pop up in other famous things later on, like Seinfeld and then in 24. But thank God this script just found him, and supposedly he joined because he too didn't anticipate that ending and was able to see that the film would be worth doing it for that moment alone. I also feel like the casting of Shawnee Smith as Amanda was another stroke of luck, who actually replaced Lee in the reverse bear trap role in that short film and did such an insane job of someone who's a struggling drug addict placed in a horrifying situation. But moreover, what's more crazy to me, and just perhaps a testament to the power of time under pressure filmmaking, is that they filmed this entire project in just 18 days. They supposedly couldn't afford to shoot more than a couple of takes per actor, and even despite wanting to film it in a Hitchcockian style of filmmaking with more time and setups, that ended up making the entire film feel more rough and raw. It's not perfect, but it's also not meant to be clean and super pleasing to view aesthetically. The fact that it feels somewhat unaesthetic becomes the aesthetic, and it's just in my eyes an example of how the obstacle becomes the way. One of my favorite parts about reading about the history of the execution was that from such a limited time during the production, James adds that he and his editor found a lot of missing shots later on was needed in the final product. So to fill in the gaps, they would actually cut to newspaper clippings or still photographs or surveillance cameras within the film, and people at the time would say something like, "Wow, that's such a cool way and experimental style of filmmaking," but when in reality, it was just done out of necessity.
You know, like I'll spend a whole day trying to get my shots done, and when I wouldn't get the shots, I would just end up getting really depressed, and I would kind of like just stay there on set while everyone else has gone off to lunch. Go, oh man, what can I do to fix up my shots? So I would spend a big chunk of my lunchtime just literally not having lunch and just thinking about the shots.
So what can you learn from Saw, and what does it actually mean for you and your projects? Personally, I see this film as an achievement that worked from understanding 3 lessons. Number 1, be bold with your premise and don't just write a script but know how to sell it. Had James and Lee not shot that short film with the reverse bear trap scene, I'm not sure they would have had that same chance of getting this whole film made, even if that script was innovative and original to begin with. Number 2, back yourself with your idea if you truly believe in it, and explore real avenues of distribution that will get your film not just made, but also seen. One of the things I didn't cover in the execution part is also the post-execution, where choosing the right film festival, and in this case the Sundance Film Festival, got James and Lee their shot on the big screen in front of eyes that would be keen to pick it up and send it to around the world. Because ultimately, what good is having a good movie to show if you have nowhere to show it? And finally, number 3, use obstacles as your guidance to make the project work rather than something to avoid entirely. Time under pressure can create the most stressful of periods, but it can, in my eyes, help you grow as a problem solver. And with a little bit of luck in casting the right people, everything can come together not in a way you planned and expected, but better than you could ever actually realized. The perfect film is the one that never gets made, but the right film is the one that was good enough to be done on the day.
It's interesting because every sort of fantasy, for want of a better word, that I'd had about this film came true. Back in Australia when I was writing it, I would constantly fantasize about us making the film with our own money, it getting picked up by Sundance, becoming the hit of Sundance, then it gets picked up and all this stuff. And it's interesting, it's almost like, positive affirmations, it's not a bunch of bullshit. Like everything that I used to constantly think about seemed to happen.
By the way, if you want to see more Saw content, but a little bit more on the ridiculous side, my friend and I just did a podcast where we pitched our own Saw traps, and it's one of my favorite things I've ever done, and we're keen to do more. So if that interests you, click on the screen now or hit the link down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.